So in this hearing, in EA or EIS trigger, it was brought up once. This is about the 2 hour and 57 mark. There's a question that Lena asks about sidewalks if it were required. And there are notes saying that departments, traffic department, um, even DTS would require sidewalks. But the question is, even if it was required, would it trigger an EIS? Avalon's reply was sidewalks would be exempt through DTS exemptions. So this idea that it may not trigger, and if it did trigger, well, the sidewalks themselves are exempt. So that's kind of how it's answered. Now, nothing that is said is like a lie. It's not false. Okay, so the question I have is it the whole truth, right? It's the scope of the EIS, the EIS that um, it's subtle, but to me it's kind of important, and it sort of matters in this case. Um, I'm back at HRS 343, our EIS law. Um, I believe that there is already one trigger other than sidewalks that already happened. Propose the use of state land, that in the form of the emergency access through UH, which is a state-owned, private state road, state land. Um, this sidewalks that they were talking about would be like propose the use of county, right? City owns the right of way, um, and that would trigger. Okay, so that's the trigger point, but um, this law is very interestingly written. So let's go to like the actual like the walkthrough here. Okay, so I'm in the E clause here. So whenever an applicant, so let's just say Avalon, right, proposes in action, so let's just say this action is Aria Lane, PDH, specified by subsection A. So subsection A is the triggers, right? We just saw, and there's at least one proposed use of state land, and probably a second when required improvements on city right of way, city land. Um, that requires approval of an agency, yeah, DPP. Uh, it's not exempt by 3436. It's not. So the agency receiving and agreeing to process shall require applicant to do the EA. Okay, so um, uh, again here, in action, applicant Avalon, in action is Aria Lane. It's not. So I mean, if DTS walked in and said like, yeah, this sidewalk, we need it, then yeah, they're exempt. So DTS says the action, let's say, or whatever, is sidewalks. And in the when they go through the EA process, they'll find the exemption, which is the DTS. They have an exception list. They can do sidewalks. So if the entire action were sidewalks, then yes, absolutely, DTS would apply their exemption. In this case, the action is not just sidewalks. The action is Aria Lane PDH proposal. And so, um, yeah, I mean, DTS sidewalks exemption that only handles a very, very, very small piece of this, this action. Okay. Um, I kind of reached out to DPP about this. I said, what is Avalon saying? Why are they making that claim? And so I got something saying that, well, if it triggers it, then it's only gonna we're only gonna do the EA or EIS on the trigger point. So like if the driveway to UH, that's the trigger. We're gonna look at the driveway. We're gonna do I don't know, like test the concrete. And, oh yeah, it handles the weight of a fire truck, and then they're done. Okay, that's that's very interesting. So that's absolutely not how the law works for our EIS law. So I'm back. So okay, so HRS 343, that's the statute. That's the law assigned by the legislature. This is the corresponding rules and regulations. This is HAR 11200. This is the rules that were written to adhere to HRS 343. Okay, so there's a clause in here that a group of actions shall be treated as single action when um, it's increments of a larger program, or uh, the individual action is necessary for a larger action. So if I need access to emergency access to support the larger Aria lane, then that individual action is part of this group that shall be treated as a single action. So the entire project, the entire proposal, in the eyes of our EIS law, is seen as a single action, all of Aria lane. So when it triggers, regardless of the trigger point, it'll activate um, this process on the entire action, where the action is the Aria lane PDH proposal, the entire proposal. It activates on the entire proposal. And when that happens, there's no exemption on the books. That covers the entire gamut of the PDH proposal. So that's sort of the thing here. And um, one more thing I was kind of talking about here. So just to kind of reiterate the same point about the trigger. Um, Environmental review required for any applicant action that, one, requires one or more approvals, which this does. PDH, at least one, right? Includes one or more triggers. It does. There's proposed use of state land, and it clarifies here in subsection A here. Use of lands includes any use, permit, easement, anything. So even if the that emergency access gate is there, even if they don't touch it at all, they don't. There's nothing. You don't have to do concrete work. You don't have to do anything. It's already there. Just proposing the use of it, getting that easement for emergency access, that's a proposed use of state lands, and it will trigger. Um, there's one more like escape here. So um, it wouldn't be triggered. This is extremely nuanced here. So, um, speaking to the sidewalks improvements on Pomor Road. So, if it would be considered this a secondary action. Okay, okay. So this secondary action would be exempt, provided that the primary action not subject to discretionary consent. Okay, so if it was just roadway improvements, so if it's just sidewalks, and the primary action was not subject to discretionary consent, then it would be exempt. But discretionary consent here is an action, um, requires approval, subject to a public hearing. So, I mean, the fact that there was a hearing means that the primary action, Aria Lane, is requires discretionary consent. So it requires so a secondary action to that action, which would be potentially development of infrastructure on existing Pomo Road, is not exempt, right? So again, it's this the trigger is going to activate, and when it does, it's on the entire proposal. The whole of the PDH is seen as a single action. So it has to go, the entire proposal has to go through the EIS process, not just each tiny piece as it gets triggered.